started my fascination with Hartford, so that shows you that I have a pretty low bar. I'm very excited to be working in this city. I've been a student of cities pretty much my whole life, still am, been to as many as I can. My own personal belief in cities really hinges on their dynamism, on the fact that things change. I think the people that want things not to change have no place in a city. It's not the right organism for them. With that said, I don't think stable housing has to give in to the dynamism of a city. And housing is a human right. I think we'll hear that from other panelists. It is a fundamental need, probably more basic than anything except for food. And I think that's why we all relate to it at such a level. I was going to paint a little bit of a picture of why we're in the mess we're in. I think Gabe did a pretty good job at that. The only thing I would add, we've had job growth, we've had population growth, we've had very little housing development. Natural factors, and we're surrounded by water on three sides, right? We don't have places to go. We don't have places to annex. We don't have great connections to our surrounding areas. I think all of that is pretty obvious and pretty basic if you stop to think about it. I think what most people don't think about, though, is that this isn't a new problem. And maybe that depends on when you came to this city and how many booms you've seen. But we've seen this period of rapid price increase. It started in the mid-'80s, again in the late 90s, again in the mid-2000s, and we're in it again. It is a thing we see again and again and again. And it probably extends beyond that. I wasn't alive then, so I wasn't paying much attention. But this is, we're not, I think if we think that this kind of cycle is a thing that's going to go away, that has not been our history in San Francisco since the gold rush. So we have to figure out how to take this change and minimize its impacts. And it does matter. The one thing I will say about this accumulation of a boom, a slight regression, a boom, a slight regression in terms of housing prices is that every time we have one, the barbell gets a little bit starker. The distance between the people at the very low end and the very upper end becomes greater, and the amount of people in the middle becomes smaller. And that is a really important issue. I think particularly building on what Corey was saying, if we do not have a middle class, if we do not have the kind of jobs, the kind of housing, just the kind of lives that people in lower incomes can look up to and move through in San Francisco, if there really is nothing until you get to the elite, we're not going to change the paradigm of anyone, of our very low income or anyone else in between. So I will say that, our office is working really hard to figure out how we can keep the middle class. And it's a different question than what we're facing in public housing, but I think it's part of that solution, and it becomes very important. I will say my slightly depressing takeaway is that looking at all those boom and busts is that the problem isn't going to ease up for a while. We're also in the grip of macroeconomics, interest rates, a digital economy, factors that are way beyond our control. But we do have factors within our control that can help us put up a good fight and hopefully try to build up that middle. I won't go into too much detail about the solutions that we're working on in City Hall. They can get pretty wonky. I will say, Gabe mentioned a couple. Build more housing. It's really important. We haven't done enough of it. As long as we, have such competition for units, they're going to be more expensive. It's amazing that there's still a debate that is actually a possibility in San Francisco, which is why I feel it needs to be said. We do need to create more subsidized housing. We're never going to, low income, very low income, supply and demand is never going to fix that. Not in a city like San Francisco where we have so few places to go, so few options, and such beauty and desirability. It's just not going to happen. So build more at that level. And then I think the most interesting one that we're working hardest on, because the subsidized housing really does rely on the city, is work with the private sector so that they create more partnerships to do so. That might mean the private development industry so that they are building more units with their projects and doing direct contribution to housing rather than just paying us fees and funds. That also means working with the philanthropic sector, although that's a harder question I'll delve into a little bit. So what do we need to do these things? And that's really where I wanted to land. The first is obvious. We need money. Gabe mentioned $250,000. To put a finer point on that, what that represents is our local share. So when we build a low-income unit here in San Francisco, it costs about $500,000 between land costs, construction costs, et cetera. Usually we can get about half of that covered through low-income housing tax credits, other federal and state subsidies. We still need to pony up from our own local funds another $250,000. And those are for low-income units. When we get to moderate income, middle income, all those people who are priced out, we don't have any federal state subsidies. We pay 100% of that cost. Frankly, that's why we're not building any. It's incredibly expensive, but it's a huge problem. Right now, median rents, so a family of four at 100% it's of median income, right in the middle, makes about $100,000. That is not nothing. In almost anywhere else in the country, it would not be considered a struggle. Here, the average rental goes for 160, 170% of median income. You can't even touch home ownership until you're at 200% of median income. So we have a whole lot of people above that low income threshold of about 50% of median income where we actually are providing subsidized housing who don't have access to a unit. That's why we have the suburbs. That's why people are moving to Oakland. So money is obviously a huge problem. We do need the private sector to help us on the money side, but it's a really tough ask. One thing I'll say about the philanthropic side, when Salesforce gives our middle schools $5 million, they're touching 10,000 teenagers. When Google funded Free Muni for Youth, they gave us $7 million. They're funding over 30,000 kids rides. When you fund, I'd say you gave us $10 million for affordable housing, you'd help 20 households. 20 households. So it's not a leverageable thing. It is not like a service. It is not something that, frankly, I mean, we just can't go out and ask for that money. I wouldn't give that money. I would give it to services and public housing. I'd figure other ways to make my money go further. So it's a tough sell, and we need to figure out how to address that. Then the last thing that I want to talk about that we really need, in addition to money, is public and political will. This relates to building more housing. I think we've heard a lot lately in the papers and the rhetoric about keeping people out of my neighborhood or out of my city because people feel threatened. They feel like new job takers here are going to threaten their security. The point I want to make is no one wins in that kind of a class war. I mean, really, if we draw sides, those people with the money will win. We know that. And the city should be for everybody, right? We need to make sure that we have room for everybody at all income levels, but that we keep the people who make it culturally rich, dynamic, and artistic. If we're going to do that, if we're going to be able to keep all those people and welcome more people, we need to grow. This is a really hard message for us to give to the public. There is no advocacy for growth, really. There are a lot of advocacy against it. There's no group out there advocating and stumping for the middle class because they're all busy. They're raising their children, they're working at their jobs. So this message often in the walls of City Hall falls on deaf ears because there's no one saying it. And so if we can figure out how to build an advocacy for growth for the middle class, I think the winds of change that have prevented the building of housing in San Francisco could have a chance to shift. Thank you.